The dialogue Phaedo, subtitled On the Soul, is one of Plato's best known and most read dialogues. Socrates, who has been put on trial and found guilty, is currently sitting in his prison cell awaiting his impending execution, which is only a few hours away. The dialogue is retold from the perspective of Phaedo of Elis, a young philosopher who witnesses Socrates' discussion with Cebes and Simmias, two strangers from Egypt. As the subtitle suggests, the dialogue is most famous for defending the notion that the soul is immortal and that it survives the death of the body. In addition, the dialogue contains a comprehensive formulation and defense of the doctrine of unchanging forms, a metaphysical doctrine which characterizes Plato's later work. Throughout the dialogue, pressed by his interlocutors and facing multiple counter-arguments, Socrates develops 4 arguments for the immortality of the soul. These are generally known as the cyclical argument, the argument from recollection, the affinity argument, and the argument from life, the latter also being known as the final argument due to its position at the end of the dialogue. The cyclical argument is based on the idea that change results from opposition. When something turns cold, it was warm before, so coldness comes from warmth. When a vessel made from clay dries up and hardens, it was first wet and soft. In the same way, the life of the body must come from something opposite to it. And since life decays towards death, the opposite of that would be something immortal. Quote, "Let us examine whether those that have an opposite must necessarily come to be from their opposites and from nowhere else. As for example, when something comes to be larger, it must necessarily become larger from having been smaller before. Then if something smaller comes to be, it will come from something larger before, which became smaller. That is so," he said. "And the weaker comes to be from the stronger, and the swifter from the slower." Certainly. Further, if something worse comes to be, does it not come from the better, and the juster from the more unjust? Of course. So we have sufficiently established that all things come to be in this way, opposites from opposites. Certainly. The second argument, also known as the recollection argument, supports the immortality of the soul by pointing out that men have an innate capacity to grasp truth, as when we naturally see that 2 + 2 = 4, or that A and non-A cannot be both true at the same time. From this, it follows that when we acquire knowledge in this world, we in fact do nothing more than remember what our soul already knows. Properly interrogated, Cebes insists, any person can have a recollection of true knowledge. Furthermore, when we recognize qualities in objects, beauty in a beautiful sunrise or justice in a just man, we in fact access our immutable knowledge of these abstract forms, such as beauty and justice. When we see 2 sticks being of equal length, for example, we are in fact employing the knowledge of equality present in our soul, and we need this knowledge in order to recognize equality in the first place. Third, the affinity argument relies on the observation that the soul resembles the unchanging and eternal forms more than it does the changing and mortal individual objects. From this, it is concluded that the soul must be divine, something like the form or idea corresponding to life, alongside other forms such as beauty, equality, justice, and courage. Quote, "What of the many particulars, be they men, horses, clothes, or other such things, or the many equal particulars, and all those which bear the same name as those others? Do they remain the same, or, in total contrast to those other realities, one might say, never in any way remain the same as themselves or in relation to each other? The latter is the case. They are never in the same state. These latter you could touch and see and perceive with the other senses, but those that always remain the same can be grasped only by the reasoning power of the mind. They are not seen but are invisible. That is altogether true," he said. "Do you then want us to assume 2 kinds of existence, the visible and the invisible? Let us assume this. And the invisible always remains the same, whereas the visible never does. let us assume that too. Now, one part of ourselves is the body, another part is the soul. Quite so. To which class of existence do we say the body is more alike and akin? To the visible, as anyone can see. What about the soul? Is it visible or invisible? It is not visible to men, Socrates, he said. At this point, Socrates is confronted with two counter-arguments from his interlocutors. Cebes is suggesting that the soul is similar to the harmony in a lyre, where the strings and the wood and the other parts achieve a certain sound that is harmonious. But the harmony is dependent upon the material. It's dependent, thus, upon perishable components. And it disappears once these components are taken apart. For his part, Simmias is suggesting that the soul could outlive some deaths, but it can also eventually wear off after being reincarnated many times in different bodies where it constantly associates with bodily emotions. In response to this, Socrates puts forward the fourth argument, the argument from life. The argument from life starts with the assumption that forms do not mutate or allow blending with other forms. The even and the uneven, the musical and the unmusical, are fundamentally different things. It follows that since the soul always brings life to a being, it cannot have any element of death in it. It will not admit to any alteration towards death, just as even numbers do not admit any alteration towards the uneven. Therefore, the soul is the form or idea of life, and it is immortal. The dialogue ends with a rich Platonic myth. Socrates, now convinced of the soul's survival after death due to completed proofs, presents a depiction of what he believes death may be like. He does so by creating a myth that draws inspiration from existing religious traditions while also incorporating innovative elements. This myth is based on a supposed revelation about the actual shape of the earth, which is spherical and composed of three distinct atmospheres: water, air, and ether. According to this myth, the souls of the deceased are judged and punished in a network of underground rivers and lakes before being reincarnated in an atmosphere appropriate to their level of purity or impurity. The least pure are relegated to water. Some reside in air, while the purest live in Olympus-like dwellings in ether. The myth goes on to describe the life of those residing in the ether in great detail, revealing that they are long-lived, happy, and have direct contact with the gods. Some souls are also granted permanent disembodiment and sent to even finer abodes. The dialogue Phaedo has had a lasting influence on later philosophy. It has been commentated upon many times by ancient and modern writers, and it is generally seen as a crucial formulation for categories that we employ both in philosophy and in everyday life. In an introduction to the dialogue, David Gallup writes that the dialogue is the source of, quote, a whole range of dualities, which have become deeply ingrained in Western philosophy, theology, and psychology over 2 millennia. Soul and body, mind and matter, intellect and sense, reason and emotion, reality and appearance, unity and plurality, perfection and imperfection, immortal and mortal, permanence and change, eternal and temporal, divine and human, heaven and earth. End of quote. The final moments of Socrates involve him consuming hemlock, speaking his enigmatic last words, and departing. These are widely regarded as some of the most renowned passages in philosophy. Socrates' last words were addressed to his friend Crito and were, "Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Please don't forget to pay the debt." Asclepius was the Greek god of healing, and the mention of the rooster is believed to have symbolized a sacrifice for the attainment of good health. The stark contrast between Socrates' composed demeanor and the distress of his companions leads us to the suggestion that his level of comprehension and self-control surpasses theirs and establishes Socrates as a leading figure of the Western civilization.